an October night in 1974, Stanford University was quiet in the way elite campuses often are after dark. Orderly, confident, almost untouchable. Students slept behind locked doors, bells stood silent, and the church at the center of campus felt like the safest place imaginable. Inside that church, a young woman sought nothing more than solitude, reflection, and rest. And by morning, she was dead. What investigators found was disturbing, ritualistic, and completely at odds with the image Stanford projected to the world. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear suspect, and no immediate explanation for how violence had entered a sacred space so easily. Questions remained for decades, until one development, long after most had stopped looking, changed everything. This is the story of that one pristine university church, that one night, and that one woman locked behind its doors who never made it out alive. This is the story of Arlis Perry. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Ashwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is eerie in the most dark and twisted and terrifying way.
You don't think murder when you hear Stanford.
Or church in Stanford.
No. I mean, church sometimes, depending on, do you remember that cult in the church, the Opus Dei?
Oh, I don't know about this.
The Opus Dei, the one that centers in Da Vinci Code.
Right, okay. Right?
So the Opus Dei, I was, side tangent, reading an interesting article about the Spanish bank collapse and how one of the biggest European banks was the Spanish bank that collapsed. And when a investigation was done, it was found that Opus Dei was sort of running it. So the church sometimes can be
a place of death. But church plus Stanford University, church on Stanford University.
Yeah.
And with that, let's get into this story.
Before that, subscribe. If you're new to the channel, because we are trying to get new listeners from outside India also to come and join us on these tales, hit that subscribe button. And buy that book. If you're outside India, you can get our Desi Crime book on Audible. But enough of plugs. Let's get on with the case for today.
It was a little before dawn on October 13th, 1974, when Stanford University security guard Stephen Crawford made a chilling phone call to the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department. Moments earlier, he had unlocked the heavy wooden doors of Stanford's Memorial Church and stepped into the grey morning light to place an urgent call from a payphone outside. On the line, Crawford's voice was oddly casual as he uttered words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "Hey, we've got a stiff here." Inside the dimly lit church, between the wooden pews and beneath the lofty vaulted ceiling, lay the lifeless body of a young woman. In a place meant for sanctuary and prayer, a scene of unspeakable horror had been discovered. Deputies rushed to the memorial church and were met with a sight that defied belief. The victim, later identified as 19-year-old Arlis Perry, was found sprawled on her back near the altar, her body positioned in what one investigator would describe a ritualistic manner. Arlis was nude from the waist down, and an ice pick was protruding from the back of her skull. The handle of the ice pick had snapped off, leaving the steel shaft embedded fatally deep. In a final act of depravity, 2 3-foot altar candles from the church had been used to violate and degrade her, one inserted into her vagina and another placed between her breasts, partially tucked into her blouse. Faint bruising around her neck suggested someone had tried to strangle her as well. The methodical arrangement of her body, arms folded over her chest and her blue jeans strangely laid across her legs in a diamond shape, gave the disturbing impression of an intentional staged scene. In the soft glow of the church's stained glass-filtered light, the crime scene looked like a grotesque mockery of a religious ritual, all towards a young newlywed who had moved to campus only weeks earlier, now lying lifeless in the very place she had sought comfort. One retired Stanford police captain later said, "I had never seen anything so eerie." A church official, upon being escorted in to view the scene, murmured in horror that, quote, "This must be the work of the devil." Indeed, in the heart of Stanford's campus, at the foot of a towering altar dedicated to peace and reflection, it seemed as if unimaginable evil had announced itself. The peaceful silence of the chapel had been pierced by violence sometime in the dead of the night, turning a house of worship into a crime scene that detectives would never forget. The discovery of Arlis Perry's body set off a frenzy of fear and speculation both on campus and in the broader community. Who could have perpetrated such a sacrilegious atrocity in a locked church? And why would anyone target this young woman in such a bizarre and brutal fashion? Authorities would later spend decades grappling with those very questions. But in order to understand how Arlis came to be alone in Memorial Church that fateful night and how this crime came to be, we must step back to earlier that evening. Only hours before her murder, Arlis was just another student's wife navigating life on campus, a devout Christian who had sought solace in prayer. The nightmare that unfolded in the early morning hours of October 13 began with a very ordinary argument on the preceding night and a walk of faith that would tragically be her last. Arlis K. Dykema was born and raised in the quiet city of Bismarck, North Dakota. By all accounts, she was a wholesome, kind-hearted young woman with deep religious convictions. In high school, she fell in love with a classmate madly, a classmate named Bruce Perry, and the two became inseparable high school sweethearts. In August 1974, just 2 months after their wedding, Arlis packed up her Midwestern life and moved with Bruce to California so he could continue his studies at Stanford University, where, at 19 years old, Arlis, petite, blonde, and spectacled, was known for the warm smile behind her large, round glasses. She had traded the prairies of North Dakota for the palm-lined avenues of Stanford's campus, carrying with her strong Christian faith and the optimism of a young bride embarking on a new chapter. Life in California was a big change for Arlis. While Bruce, then 20, was a sophomore pre-med student at Stanford, Arlis found a job as a receptionist at a Palo Alto law firm and settled into the role of a supportive spouse, with the newlyweds living in the graduate student housing at Quillen Hall in Stanford's Escondido village. Far from home, Arlis stayed in close touch with her family and friends back in North Dakota, often writing letters about her experiences navigating her faith in a new atmosphere and her desire to help others spiritually, the kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to pray for someone in need or strike up a conversation about God. In fact, the Mercury News later noted that Arlis was deeply religious and routinely sought comfort in prayer. It was completely in character for Arlis after a stressful day or a quarrel to turn to her faith for guidance. On the night of October 12, 1974, just such a trivial fight arose. That Saturday, Arlis and Bruce spent the late evening together on campus. Around 11:30 p.m., the couple walked to the campus post office to mail a letter, and as they strolled under the faint glow of street lamps, an argument sparked between them. A petty disagreement over their car's tire pressure. The spat was nothing out of the ordinary for a young married couple, but it left both feeling frustrated. Bruce wanted to return home, while Arlis, the introspective soul, felt the need to cool off and collect herself before going back to Bruce to make peace. Stanford's stately Memorial Church, often called Memchu by students, stood at the center of campus, its ornate sandstone facade and stained glass windows a familiar sight. Arlis, seeking a few moments of peace and prayer, told Bruce that she wanted to stop by the church to pray alone before coming home. It was a habit for her. The couple were known to visit the church often for a quiet meditation. Bruce, though, wasn't thrilled at the idea of splitting up so late at night, but Arlis insisted she'd be fine. The campus felt so safe to them. Stanford in the 1970s was still a place where students walked freely at all hours, despite some recent crimes in the area. Perhaps to reassure her husband, Arlis promised she would only be a short while.
Shura, not just, Stanford is one thing, but an American college campus seems like a very self-contained space where even us, when we went to, Alma in Michigan, never did we think twice about, walking out.
Time of the night.
Time of the night. I mean, in fact, if we were walking out, it was usually at late at night,
late
going
hours.
here, there. And this was Stanford, which arguably one of the, safest and most prestigious campuses there. So, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have crossed my mind once. And on top of that, you're going to the church, which, if anything, is the safest place in the safest place.
Absolutely. And I think to add to that, on a campus, 11:30 isn't late.
It's not late.
There
Night's
are
just
kids
begun.
out
Yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah.
kind of walking all across. Weeknights, not so much, but it's still a bustling campus. And when it's a residential campus, there's just people everywhere. So 11:30 by all, it feels safe.
Yeah.
And so the couple parted ways outside the church. Bruce watched Arlis step through the large doors into the dim interior of Memorial Church sometime around 11:30 p.m. But neither of them could have imagined that this would be the last time they would see each other. Bruce headed back towards their apartment in Escondido Village, expecting his wife to return after saying her prayers. Inside the vast empty sanctuary of Memorial Church, Arlis took a seat after she knelt down to pray, alone with her thoughts and faith. The church was silent at that hour, except for the faint echo of her footsteps on the stone floor and the whisper of her prayers. Somewhere in the darkness, however, another presence lurked, one that Arlis likely did not notice until it was too late. Crawford was a familiar figure on campus, a 30-year-old Stanford Department of Public Safety employee, formerly a police officer, and now working as a campus security guard. That night, as usual, it was Crawford's duty to make sure all was secure before locking up the church. According to his later statements to police, Crawford encountered a few worshippers inside and informed them that the church would be closing soon. At 11:45 p.m. by his account, he locked the doors of Memorial Church with no one left inside. At least no one he noticed. The heavy doors closed, and Arlis Perry was sealed inside the dark church as midnight approached. Bruce, meanwhile, returned to Quillen Hall and waited for his wife, but midnight passed, and Arlis did not come home. Perhaps Bruce dozed off for a time, expecting her to come back any minute. But as the hours ticked by with no signs of Arlis, his worry grew. By 3 a.m., Arlis had been gone for over 3 hours for what should have been a brief late-night prayer, and Bruce's concern turned to alarm. He picked up the phone in their small apartment and called the Stanford campus police, reporting that his wife was missing and had never come home. This was entirely out of character for her, and Bruce knew it. The Stanford police dispatcher took note. Young wife, last seen at Memorial Church hours ago. And so, quickly, campus police officers were dispatched to check Memorial Church for any sign of Arlis. They arrived at around 3:30 a.m. and found the church dark and securely locked on all sides. Peering through the ornate door and glass-stained windows, the officers saw nothing amiss inside the shadowy interior. They banged on the doors and called out, but no one answered. Satisfied that the church was empty and likely assuming Arlis must have left and perhaps gone somewhere else, the police left the scene. Bruce was advised that nothing unusual was found at the church. All he could do now was wait anxiously and hope for a phone call or a knock at the door that would bring Arlis back to him.
I mean, technically, the campus security saying there was nothing in the church is incorrect because you didn't check in the church. You checked the inside from the outside, which is probably the worst way to go about checking the inside of any big structure. And the Stanford Church, from images at least, is a huge
Behemoth building.
Behemoth building. You know, it's almost Victorian in how beautiful and big it is. Anyway, would it have mattered if at that particular hour they would have checked? Could it have made a difference? Or was it just a matter of the discovery time would have been different?
I think by that point it was already done. And what will come here, what will make that distinction is more of Crawford's timeline when we find that out. When he checked the doors, what he found, and that will help put this together. But I think by 3:30, 3:40 when the police have arrived, it's been done.
No, the reason I ask is often in these cases you're like, maybe if he checked 5 minutes before, 10 minutes before, and it brings you, either it makes you anxious or brings you solace. In this case, it brings me solace that, all right, it's not like something could have been done. I'm sure you'll get to the Crawford bit, but I don't blame Crawford for following basic protocol.
No, not at all. But also, he was also supposed to check the church at 11:45, and he also did not check the church from inside, because had he, she was still inside. He has locked her in. So even he didn't fully follow.
But you said he went in to tell
everyone, and then he just locked it from the outside on all doors. He never made sure that everyone actually left.
Okay. All right.
So I don't know again what exactly locking up protocol looks like. Does it mean going and seeing between pews if someone is there or not?
And does the protocol change in practice over years of repeating the same thing, and you get slightly complacent?
Or change after a crime happening and you bolstering those protocols post. So. Unbeknownst to Bruce, though, as he paced through the pre-dawn hours, Arlis was still inside Memorial Church. The investigation later concluded that she had never left after entering to pray. At some point after the doors were locked, the predator struck. Whether Arlis was initially alone in the vast sanctuary or whether someone had been hiding in the darkness is still uncertain. Detectives theorized that she may have been locked in with her killer when Crawford locked up, the assailant lurking undetected in the cavernous church. Perhaps as she prayed with closed eyes, footsteps approached from behind. We will never know if Arlis even had a chance to scream. What is known comes from the evidence left behind. A toppled kneeling pillow near Arlis's body would later yield traces of semen, suggesting a sexual assault took place at the front of the church. The position of Arlis's body, on her back, legs spread, arms placed on her chest, and the placement of the candles indicated the killer had taken the time to pose the scene deliberately. The ice pick used to piece her skull was presumably brought by the attacker, suggesting a premeditated intention to kill. And the missing handle of that ice pick hinted that significant force had been used, breaking it off during the attack. Arlis's glasses, which she wore routinely, were not found at the scene, a subtle detail that investigators noted, wondering if the murderer had taken them as a twisted trophy. Later, an FBI profiler consulted on the case assumed that the killer likely kept a quote detailed diary and would have taken a keepsake from the crime, given the highly personal nature of the killing. The absence of Arlis's eyeglasses loomed as one possible answer to that prediction. Sometime between midnight and 3 a.m., under the watchful eyes of the mosaics and angels depicted on Memorial Church's ceiling, violence claimed Arlis Perry's life. The sanctified silence of the chapel hid every trace of the struggle. With the doors locked, her killer had ample time to arrange the scene without interruption. Then it seems the murderer slipped out a side door. Investigators would later note that one of the church's side doors was found slightly ajar, showing evidence of being forced open from the inside as if someone exited that way. The campus security guard, Stephen Crawford, would later claim that when he returned in the early morning around 5:40 to open up, he found that particular door unlocked and ajar, which is what led him to enter and discover the body. If true, it meant the killer's escape route was likely that side door, leading out into the chilly darkness of the quad undetected. By Crawford's account, the moment he opened the door and his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, he saw Arlis's body between the pews and knew instantly that she was dead. He hurried to call the authorities, making that disturbingly flippant report about a stiff in the church. Within minutes, sheriff deputies and detectives were converging on the scene, sealing off Memorial Church as a crime scene, and ushered a stunned, sleepy campus into lockdown and alarm. Bruce Perry's worst fears were about to be confirmed in the most devastating way imaginable. News of the murder spread quickly that Sunday, stunning the Stanford community. The idea that a young woman had been brutally slayed inside the university's iconic church overnight was almost unbelievable. Stanford University officials, in shock, offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the killer's arrest, an extraordinary step reflecting how desperate they were for answers. Students woke to find their tranquil campus swarming with police cars and roped off by yellow crime scene tape. Fear set in as rumors flew. Was there a killer on the loose targeting the Stanford community? The Memorial Church murder did not seem random or like a simple robbery gone wrong. It appeared calculated, vicious, and possibly ritualistic. Many could not shake the feeling that something satanic or cult-like had occurred in that holy space. From the outset, homicide detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office faced immense pressure to solve the case. They began their investigation with the logical starting point in any murder: those closest to the victim.
A small piece of information for our sort of non-American listeners is that unlike Indian universities, universities in the States do not have fixed borders.
Correct.
So you can walk in and out of the campus pretty easily. The campus building is a different matter.
Yeah, they stay locked at night and whatnot.
But the campus itself is one that you can walk through, walk past. And a church, whether in the campus or churches in general, anybody has access to them, and they're free, and there's no registry kept. So
Yep.
I'm right now wondering. Of course, the CCTV and all will come in later if at all that exists.
1970s.
But exactly, that's what I was. But yeah, I mean, there is no way of ascertaining at this stage whether this was a Stanford resident or
Correct.
not.
No way of knowing. And so as the police begin their questioning, Bruce Perry, the distraught husband, was brought in as one of the first people on the very morning his wife's body was found. It's not hard to imagine Bruce's state. He had spent an agonizing night awake, then likely learned from police at dawn that Arlis was gone. Now, he found himself under the scrutiny of investigators who knew that statistically, a spouse is often a suspect in a young woman's murder. He recounted their movements and their trivial argument about the car tire, even admitting that he had gone to bed and only called police when he awoke to find her still missing in the early morning. But as he's talking, detectives noticed something that immediately raised alarm bells. What looked like bloodstains on Bruce's shirt. The police acted swiftly the moment they noticed that, making Bruce sit for a polygraph test and taking his shirt in as evidence to get the blood tested. But just as quickly, the police realized this wasn't the angle to probe. Bruce, without hesitation, agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed, showing no signs of deception. And the blood from his shirt came back as a negative match for his wife Arlis. Additionally, fingerprints lifted from the crime scene, including a partial palm print on one of the candles, did not match Bruce's prints. Bit by bit, the evidence supported what Arlis's family and friends already believed. Bruce Perry was not his wife's killer. Investigators swiftly and publicly cleared Bruce of suspicion, concluding that the heartbroken young husband had no role in this crime. But Bruce was still left to grapple with unimaginable loss, now a widower at age 20, while strangers tried to piece together Arlis's final moments. With Bruce ruled out, detectives turned their attention to others who might have been in or around the church that night. Early leads were scarce. In fact, only a handful of people were known to have even set foot in Memorial Church during the late night hours when Arlis was there. In an effort to map out every person's movements, the sheriff's office identified 7 individuals in total who had entered the church between the late evening and early morning. Arlis herself and the guard Stephen Crawford were 2 of them. 4 others were traced and people interviewed, likely the few people Crawford had ushered out at closing time around 11:45 p.m. Their accounts provided nothing suspicious though. But the 7th person remained a tantalizing mystery. An unknown young man seen by a passerby around midnight heading towards the church door. This witness described him as a sandy-haired man, about 5 feet 10 inches, medium built, not wearing a watch. Whoever he was, this man never came forward and was never identified. The description did not match Stephen Crawford or any known campus employees, nor did it match any other church attendees. Was he simply a late-night worshipper who left before the crime? Or could he have been the killer, slipping out before anyone knew a murder had occurred? The sandy-haired stranger would become one of many frustrating question marks in this case. As forensic teams combed through Memorial Church for evidence, they found very little that pointed directly to a culprit. There was surprisingly no sign of forced entry into the church doors from outside, aside from the one door Crawford found open, which had been forced from the inside by a departing killer. This suggested that the murderer either had been locked inside with Arlis or had used a key to get in, committing the murder and then forced the door to get back out. The lack of a major struggle was noted by examiners. No chaos or overturned pews hinted that Arlis might have been caught off guard or subdued quickly. Forensic analysis in 1974 was rudimentary by modern standard. There was no DNA testing, and detectives had to rely on blood typing, fingerprints, and trace evidence. They collected the semen-stained kneeling pillow and the candles, hoping for any usable prints or hair or fibers. The partial palm print on one of the candles was compared against anyone they could think of, but it didn't conclusively match any suspect at the time. Similarly, the semen samples recovered were tested for blood type markers. It did not match Bruce's profile, it did not match Crawford's profile either. One theory was that the semen might not have been directly related to Arlis's murder at all. Perhaps an unrelated act had left it earlier there. Regardless, with no immediate DNA capability, it became a clue that led nowhere. Investigators also looked hard at Stephen Crawford initially, the security guard who had reported the body. After all, it was a trope in criminal cases that the person who found the victim could be involved.
This case has, probabilistically speaking, 2 of the most likely subsects of relationship dynamics with the victim in it that somehow are hinting at not being the folks responsible.
Who did it? And by DNA evidence.
Yeah, so you have the husband, the spouse, the partner, like you said, which, I mean, there's like an 80-90% success rate, so to say, in that being the correct perpetrator. And then there is another more than 50% accuracy of the last person who had known contact. Neither of them seem to be the person.
Correct.
So I mean, I can imagine the police is just going,
Where the-
who's this mystery person?
Where do we even begin?
I mean, it's such a, and you've no CCTV footage. Can you just explain to me what does blood work and blood analysis look like in the 70s? Is there any rudimentary DNA, or is there
It's just blood
Type?
type matching. It's literally
A
just
plus and
A
A
plus
plus,
and A plus. That's
which
it.
gives you like 1 in 6 or 7 possible,
Correct.
and I mean,
But
4
semen
major
was
ones.
DNA tested.
But again, how the semen was DNA test.
Correct.
So DNA could not be extracted from blood at this
From
point.
blood. Correct.
I
But
see.
fingerprints could be tested to fingerprints.
Sure.
Blood type could be tested to blood type.
Sure.
And semen could reveal.
Sure. Okay. One thing in our, you mentioned that Aryan, blood played a very DNA played an important role in this case, and could it play an important role in India? And it just struck me, it probably cannot for old cases because we don't have a preservation system in the 70s and 80s and 90s where we have those samples still.
Are you sure we don't?
Yeah, I don't think the process of storing blood samples in order for them to have DNA that can be tested going forward is like it's a very specific kind of way.
All these American cases, this is the third international case we're doing. And just the astronomical development in DNA testing, genetic genealogy. Aryan and I were just talking about this. This is the third case that completely coincidentally also really majorly involves that.
Yeah.
And it was making me think of Dhananjay, They had all of these theories that those two statisticians had to come up with to try and probe the possibility that he was innocent. If only they had like hordes and hordes of samples because it was a crime scene with so much.
It was also a very tampered crime scene, but you're 100% right.
But there would be something you could test. There would be, there would just be more possibilities.
I think I know that forensics in India is very advanced now, and I can only hope that cases that don't get solved, say in the last 10 years, have data preservation of the kind
really
that
hope
perhaps
so.
allows technologies 30, 40 years from now.
For sure. Because this has been eye-opening to me. I didn't know they were solving cases from years and years and years ago at this lightning speed now.
Half a century ago.
Yeah, insane.
Yeah.
So Aryan is right. Either Bruce or Crawford. Those are good possibilities to start with. And Crawford's behavior was curious from the start. Some deputies found his "we've got a stiff here" comment bizarrely flippant for someone supposedly stumbling onto such a horrific scene. And as police began to interview him, inconsistencies slowly began to emerge. Crawford told the police that he had checked the church doors again at around 2 a.m. during his patrol shift and found them all securely locked. This was odd because he will find a door open in the morning, meaning if the killer was locked at 2, the killer was still inside, either attacking Arlis or creating that crime scene. Yet, if Arlis was inside being attacked at that time, how could he have missed it? Could the killer and victim really have been in the church at 2 a.m. without Crawford noticing anything? Investigators began to doubt Crawford's timeline. Moreover, they learned that although Crawford was cooperative, he refused to take a lie detector test when other witnesses and persons of interest had just agreed to one. That choice raised an eyebrow. Why would an innocent man refuse a polygraph, especially when Bruce and others had submitted to it? Crawford was also not an ordinary security guard either. He had kind of a troubled history with Stanford's Department of Public Safety. In fact, he had been a Stanford police officer until 1972, when the campus police force underwent a reorganization. The new police chief had implemented higher standards, and many existing officers failed to meet them. Stephen Crawford was one of those who did not make the cut to remain an armed officer, effectively demoted. He was offered a position as a night watchman, a security guard instead. Colleagues recall that Crawford resented this demotion deeply, feeling humiliated and angry at the university for the blow to his status. In the months and years after, including months after Arlis's death, he acted out in petty revenge, stealing items from around campus. A human skull from the anatomy department, antique books, even a walking cane that belonged to Leland Stanford himself. In a brazen move, Crawford once used stolen letterheads to forge a Stanford diploma for himself, as if reclaiming the honor he felt denied.
Firstly, if this guy isn't the murderer, I understand the pettiness. I mean, it is a slap on the face. Secondly, fire him.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's not like he's committed all of these 3 thefts on the same day.
Yeah, that's
He's
true.
been doing it for a while.
But they were all caught in his home. So these thefts keep happening and no one could figure out who is stealing. And these were all caught after Arlis's death.
Was he fired once these
I'm about to
thefts were
find
caught?
out.
Oh my god. Okay.
Look at your face.
Oh my god. I thought, okay.
When he was eventually caught with this cache of Pilford University property in 1975, the year after Arlis died, Crawford was not just fired, he was prosecuted and received a 6-month suspended sentence for possession of stolen property. At the time, he defensively claimed his thievery was retaliation because he had been unfairly treated as a murder suspect in the Arlis Perry case. Indeed, from early on, police did view Crawford as a top person of interest. As one veteran reporter later noted, Crawford emerged as a top suspect early on because many detectives felt in their gut that Crawford knew more than he was saying. They noted, for instance, that after Bruce reported Arlis missing in the middle of the night, campus police had alerted their night security staff, including Crawford, to be on the lookout for the missing woman who was last known to be inside the church. If Crawford truly locked the church at 11:45 p.m. and heard about Arlis being missing at 3 a.m., why didn't he think to recheck inside the church sooner? Why wait until 5:45 a.m. to discover her? As one columnist later put it, Crawford never actually searched the church when he said he would. Instead, it was almost as if he knew she was there and only revealed her when he chose to. The whole situation left investigators with an unsettling feeling, but not enough proof to make an arrest. Investigators in 1974 couldn't find hard evidence tying Crawford to the murder. His fingerprints did not match the print on the candle. The semen sample did not implicate him either. Crawford also had no known connection to Arlis Perry. By all accounts, she and the guard were strangers. There was no clear motive on the surface. And so, beyond Crawford and Bruce, detectives cast a wider net. They considered the possibility of a random intruder, perhaps a prowler or transient who snuck onto campus and into the church to attack someone. Yet the nature of the crime suggested a perpetrator who was familiar with the church's layout and schedule. It would have taken time and privacy to arrange the scene as it was. A stranger might not risk loitering that long. The case also drew attention from outside law enforcement. Given the era, the early 1970s, there was speculation about links to other notorious murderers. Ted Bundy, who had killed women in nearby Palo Alto the year before, was briefly considered, but police later learned that he had an alibi. He was recorded fueling his car in a different area that night. The Zodiac Killer was also a name whispered, as he had haunted California police with unsolved murders just a few years prior. But Zodiac's known methods didn't fit this crime. Still, the brazenness of murdering someone in a church made authorities wonder if they were dealing with a budding serial predator. In the absence of an obvious suspect, investigators had to follow every bizarre clue and morbid theory that arose. And before long, the Arlis Perry case would take a bizarre turn indeed. One that led detectives down a dark rabbit hole involving an infamous serial killer on the other side of the country and rumors of a nationwide satanic cult. What began as a straightforward, if deeply puzzling homicide investigation at Stanford was about to intersect with one of the strangest chapters in true crime history. And it all started with a cryptic message from a murderer known as the Son of Sam. As months passed in 1974 and 1975, the Memorial Church murder case grew cold. Arlis's homicide remained unsolved, casting a long shadow over Stanford. In this vacuum of answers, theories began to multiply. One particularly sinister theory gained traction, that Arlis Perry's murder was the work of a satanic cult. This notion might have been dismissed as far-fetched if not for a startling series of hints and claims that emerged from an unlikely source. A convicted serial killer imprisoned 3,000 miles away in New York. In the late 1970s, David Berkowitz, infamously known as the Son of Sam killer, had terrified New York City between 1976 and 1977 during one of its most chaotic eras.
The city is preoccupied with the killer who in one note signed himself the Son of Sam.
Most of the victims have been young women with shoulder-length dark brown hair.
He targeted young couples, mostly shooting them at close range with a .44 caliber revolver, often in parked cars late at night. 6 people were killed and 7 others were wounded, but the randomness of the attacks made everyone feel like the next target. What made the case explode into public obsession were the letters he sent to police and newspapers, rambling, mocking notes signed Son of Sam, filled with threats and dark humor. What also made him infamous was that Berkowitz claimed he was acting on orders from a demonic entity, later infamously saying that a neighbor's dog was possessed and commanded him to kill. The media amplified his persona, turning him from a criminal into a symbol of urban fear. His arrest in August 1977 brought relief to the city, but his infamy endured because not just for the murders, but for how he weaponized fear, attention, and myth long before the age of social media. Now, while behind bars, Berkowitz started dropping hints that he was not a lone gunman, but part of a cult network orchestrating crimes. Among his ramblings were references to a murder of a young woman in a church in California, unmistakably pointing to Arlis Perry.
Just clarify the timeline here. He was in prison. He was caught in 77.
77, yeah.
And his ramblings begin around the same time.
Around that time, 78, 79.
Arlis was murdered in 73.
Correct.
So it's been almost 4-5 years of all the case going cold.
That's right.
And then it's about to make this pivot.
Correct. In 1979, Berkowitz sent an anonymous letter and a package to law enforcement in North Dakota, Arlis' home state, containing curious items, some occult literature, a photo of a ritual, and a book about witchcraft. Scrawled in the margin of that book was a chilling message. Arlis Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University. Berkowitz later corresponded with an investigative journalist, claiming that Arlis' murder had been committed by a satanic cult member he called Manson II. This mysterious reference suggested that perhaps Arlis was targeted intentionally, possibly for trying to minister or convert someone involved in the occult. Astonishingly, there was a kernel of real history behind this wild claim. Friends of Arlis in Bismarck recall that a few months before she moved to California, Arlis had indeed shown concern about some local young people dabbling in occult practices. Being devout, she wanted to steer them away from darkness. There was talk that Arlis and a friend had once gone to a gathering of self-proclaimed Satanists or occultists in North Dakota to save those involved by preaching Christianity to them. It sounded like urban legend, but Berkowitz's note uncannily mirrored this rumor, implying that Arlis was hunted and stalked from North Dakota to Stanford.
I just want to point out that this is an attention-seeking serial killer.
Absolutely.
One that, it sounds like, oh my God, how does he know all these things? It's been 4-5 years to a highly publicized case.
Right.
I'm sure he has read the rumors. I'm sure he has read the actual reports. And part of me is feeling he's bored in prison right now.
Absolutely possible.
Yeah.
But detectives with no other leads wondered, could it be true? Did a vengeful cultist follow her across the country to silence her efforts? Santa Clara detectives, grappling with no other solid leads, took the bait. In 1980, Detective Ken Kahn of Santa Clara Sheriff's Office, who was involved in the Perry case, actually flew to New York to interview Berkowitz in person. If there was even a 1% chance of a lead, they had to pursue it. Berkowitz, who had proven to be an erratic narrator of his own crimes, played coy. At one point, he claimed that during a cult meeting in New York, someone stood up and boasted of killing Arlis Perry. But whenever detectives pressed for a name or details, Berkowitz grew quiet. In the interview, Berkowitz suddenly cut things short, saying he feared retribution from the cult if he, quote, snitched. He hinted that his own life had been threatened in prison, and indeed someone had slashed his throat in an incident, leaving a scar, and he ominously suggested, quote, if I tell you the name, they'll kill my father. Faced with this theatrical stonewalling, investigators left empty-handed. Later, Kahn and others concluded that Berkowitz had nothing truly useful to offer. He was likely spinning tales for attention, conflating bits of rumors he'd heard with grandiose lies. The San Jose Mercury News reported that after interviewing Berkowitz, authorities believed he had, quote, nothing of value to offer on the Arlis Perry case. The cult theory, while never completely disproven, remained just that, a theory, unsupported by any direct evidence linking an occult group to Arlis' murder. Nonetheless, the idea of a ritualistic killing had already taken root in public imagination. Arlis's case became entangled in the early threads of the coming satanic panic era. Investigative journalist Mercury Terry, the author of The Ultimate Evil, which is a book probing the Son of Sam cult claims, devoted a portion of his work to Arlis's story. Terry went so far as to travel to Bismarck to dig up information where he discovered a strange coincidence that another man named Bruce Perry, Bruce D. Perry, the same name as Arlis's husband, was listed in the Stanford student directory at the time, complete with a Stanford phone number. In a bizarre mix-up, Arlis's best friend and even Bruce's mother had accidentally dialed that number, trying to reach the young couple after Arlis moved, only to reach this other Bruce Perry instead. Maury Terry speculated that the listing wasn't a coincidence at all, but a trap set by someone on campus to lure Arlis or confuse her contacts. Indeed, Arlis wrote to her friend in September 1974 about the strange mistake, noting with some amazement that there was another Bruce D. Perry at Stanford, newly married that summer. Quote, "One thing, his wife's name is not Arlis," she joked in the letter. To a conspiracy hunter like Terry, this was a tantalizing clue that Manson too might have been hiding in plain sight at Stanford, even adopting Bruce's name in a twisted game. However, no tangible proof ever emerged to support the notion of an elaborate plot. Decades later, authorities would state plainly that they found no evidence Arlis was killed by anyone other than a lone individual, and certainly no proof of cult involvement. Back in California, as years turned into 1980s, the Arlis Perry investigation languished. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office kept the case file open and periodically reviewed it as a cold case, but each re-examination yielded nothing new. For the Perry family, this was a bitter reality. Bruce Perry moved away and eventually built a career in psychiatry. He rarely spoke publicly about Arlis, determined to guard his and her privacy as he tried to heal and move forward. Arlis's parents and siblings in Bismarck, though, kept her memory alive. Her mother Jean would later say that not knowing the killer made it impossible to fully grieve. The why of it all hung over them like a dark cloud. Stanford University also carried the scar of Arlis's murder. Memorial Church remained a place of worship, weddings, and university events, but for many years, whispers of its dark past persisted among students. Security measures on campus were gradually tightened. No longer would churches or buildings be left open at night to the public without oversight. The murder of Arlis Perry had joined 3 other unsolved murders in the Stanford area between 1973 and 1974. The murder of 21-year-old Leslie Perloff, 20-year-old David Levine, and 21-year-old Janet Taylor, a tragic cluster that had left the community on edge, known grimly as the Stanford murders. Arlis's case was arguably the most infamous of them due to its disturbing circumstances. As one Stanford Daily article observed at the time, quote, "After 4 unsolved homicides, Stanford is a decidedly grimmer place," end quote. But then, in 1984, a decade after Arlis's death, DNA profiling was introduced to criminal forensics, and hope was rekindled that science might crack what detective work could not. Aryan, so far, before we get into sort of DNA new age technology, do you have any theories on what's going on here?
I'm just trying to piece. My instinctive gut tells me Crawford is involved. But then you point out rightly that the semen doesn't match his DNA, and the fingerprint, palm fingerprint. So theoretically, we have, if my instinct with Crawford is right, there is Crawford plus 1 or Crawford plus 2 people involved.
Because this is not a case without DNA, where you're like, oh, it could be Crawford, we just don't know because we have.
There is DNA, yeah, exactly.
And it's been tested, and it's not.
And we have blood that doesn't belong to Crawford. Is that the case or no?
No, it's just Arlis's blood.
It's just Arlis's blood. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think he played, I'm just feeling he played a role in letting the person in or letting the person out, and of course doing what was done.
And you feel that why?
But because lack of any other suspect so far. I mean,
Sure. You're not buying the occult practice logic.
I'm not buying an occult practice logic. I'm not buying the cult logic. I do feel occult elements might be involved because this is out of the Da Vinci Code. This is out of, I'm forgetting which of his books starts with it, but it starts with the murder in the Louvre. I think it was Da Vinci Code only, which it was Da Vinci Code's opening, which was a very ritualistic
Sure.
murder. And so I'm like, I don't know.
Cool, we're getting to it. Over the years, as DNA technology advanced, the Santa Clara County Crime Lab periodically tested all evidence from cold cases in hopes of finding a match. In Arlis's case, the key was to find any preserved biological evidence that could yield a DNA profile. The teams had samples from back in the early 2000s when detectives had quietly collected DNA from various individuals tied to the case. Bruce Perry had willingly given a sample to fully clear his name. Stephen Crawford, the former security guard, had also been swabbed at some point in the past. So investigators always had the semen samples from the crime scene and the samples of a lot of early suspects, but over all of these years, they assumed it was already tested and found useless. Nothing had come as a match to anyone in the system. But then, by the mid-2010s, the Arlis Perry case was in the hands of a new generation of detectives who refused to let it rest. Sergeant Richard Rick Alanis of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office had grown up hearing about the infamous Memorial Church murder, and upon joining the cold case unit, made it his mission to solve it. Alanis and his colleagues combed through boxes of stored evidence and files, revisiting every detail with fresh eyes. And that is when they discovered something absolutely insane. An astronomical evidence mishap. The pants Arlis had been wearing were mislabeled in storage. For years, the wrong pants, a much larger pair that actually belonged to Bruce, her husband, sat in the evidence box, and Arlis's own pants were not examined.
I have goosebumps.
Same.
What did they find in those pants?
Let's get to it. This astonishing mix-up wasn't discovered until 2016, when cold case investigators led by Detective Rick Alanis painstakingly re-inventoried every item again. In 2017, the real pants Arlis had worn on the night of her death were at last tested with cutting-edge DNA methods, and the results were electrifying. The semen on Arlis's clothing yielded a viable DNA profile, and when run through known individuals, it came back as a match to one man long suspected in her murder, Stephen Blake Crawford. In 2018, nearly 44 years after the murder, investigators had the smoking gun they had been chasing for decades. Sheriff Laurie Smith, who by 2018 had risen through the ranks and was now leading the department, was determined not to let this opportunity slip away. On the strength of the DNA evidence, a judge signed a search and arrest warrant for the now 72-year-old Stephen Crawford, who was living in a modest studio apartment in San Jose, California. Detectives carefully prepared to confront him, knowing that a man who had evaded justice for so long might react unpredictably. They also quietly re-interviewed a few old witnesses and cross-checked Crawford's fingerprints again, tying up any loose ends before making their move. Crawford, for his part, seemed to sense the noose tightening. Sheriff Smith noted that investigators had contacted Crawford in the weeks leading up to the warrant, and he was aware that he was, quote, still a person of interest. He had been interviewed again, but he, quote, did not provide any information concrete enough to warrant his arrest at the time. Still, he had known that for all of these years, they were closing in. On the morning of June 28, 2018, a team of sheriff's deputies and San Jose police officers descended on the Del Coronado apartments on Camden Avenue in San Jose, where Crawford lived alone. It was a sunny Thursday around 9 a.m. when they knocked on the door of apartment 5255 with their guns drawn and a warrant in hand. Inside, Crawford refused to open up immediately. The officers announced they had a search warrant and needed to speak with him. In response, Crawford asked for some time, claiming he needed to get dressed. The deputies waited tensely outside the closed door, aware that a desperate suspect might try anything, including suicide or an ambush. After a brief pause, they decided to make the entry. Pushing through the door, they caught a glimpse of the elderly Crawford sitting on his bed with a handgun in his hand. "Gun!" someone shouted, and the officers immediately retreated back into the hallway for cover. They shouted for Crawford to drop the weapon, but suddenly, a single gunshot rang out from inside the apartment. When the tactical team rushed back in, they found Stephen Crawford slumped on his bed, a fatal self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. He had killed himself rather than face arrest. In the surreal moment that followed, the deputies cleared the small apartment, confirming there was no threat and no other occupants. The man whom they had long suspected of being Arlis Perry's murderer was dead, taking any chance of a courtroom confession or cross-examination with him. Quote, "Our detectives didn't fire any shots. All of this was captured on body-worn camera," Sheriff Smith later emphasized, underscoring that Crawford's death was by his own hand. The aftermath of Crawford's suicide was a mix of triumph and frustration for law enforcement. On one hand, they finally had closure. The DNA evidence, combed with years of suspicion, left little doubt that Crawford was Arlis's killer. Sheriff Laurie Smith announced to the press that the case was solved. "We finally have closure on this case," she said, calling the murder callous and cold, and expressing relief that the decades-long mystery was put to rest. On the other hand, because of Crawford's suicide, there would be no full confession, no trial to publicly lay out all the facts, and perhaps no answers to the lingering why that still loomed. Detectives executed the search warrant on his apartment and vehicle meticulously, though, searching for any further evidence. In Crawford's possession, they found an unfinished suicide note dated back to 2016, suggesting he had contemplated taking his life when cold case detectives had revived the investigation 2 years earlier. They also discovered something darkly ironic. Among his belongings, Crawford kept the dust jacket of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, the very book that posited a cult theory for the Arlis Perry case. It seems Crawford was aware of the infamy surrounding his crime and had read about the wild theories pinning it on Satanists, all while knowing the prosaic truth, that he, a disgruntled security guard, was the perpetrator. Investigators also noted that Crawford's white 1970s-era car, which he had owned at the time of the murder, was still in his possession, parked at the apartment complex. They towed it for examination, though any forensic value after 44 years would likely be minimal. More importantly, they intended to compare Crawford's DNA to other unsolved homicides in the region. Santa Clara Sheriff's Office had one more Stanford cold case on the books, the 1973 stabbing of physics student David Levine, and they wanted to be certain whether Crawford had any involvement. Ultimately, though, that case remained unsolved until another suspect was identified, and Crawford was never linked to it. Detectives also hoped to find Arlis's missing glasses or any keepsakes from the crime among Crawford's things. If such a trophy existed, it was not made public, leaving the question of the glasses unanswered. When word of Crawford's death and implication in Arlis's murder reached her family, it brought a wave of bittersweet emotion. For Arlis's mother, Jane Dykema, then 88 years old, the news was both shocking and relieving. The monster who killed her daughter had been unmasked at last. But there was also regret. Jean's husband, Marvin, Arlis's father, had died just a few months earlier in 2018 at the age of 89. He went to his grave not knowing who killed his daughter. This was one of his wishes, to know before he died. But he didn't quite make it, Arlis's sister Karen said sadly in an interview, adding, quote, "After all these years, it's about time the truth came out." The family expressed gratitude to the detectives who never gave up. They also couldn't help but wonder, though, why? Why Arlis? Why that night? In Karen's words, even with the case resolved, the question of why Arlis was killed remains as unresolved as ever. Indeed, Stephen Crawford took to his death the exact motive for his actions. However, those who studied the case, like journalist Scott Herold, have posited a theory. He believed that Crawford's simmering anger at Stanford University for demoting him for what he perceived as humiliation played a role. In choosing to commit a depraved act in the heart of campus, in a church of all places, Crawford was, in a sense, striking at the institution he hated. Arlis, being there alone and vulnerable, became the unfortunate target of his rage. She paid a terrible price, he said, suggesting that Arlis's murder was a twisted form of Crawford exacting revenge on Stanford itself.
The whole random intruder idea is just flat wrong. And the key thing here to remember is that it took the killer a while to lay out Arlis's body, to use the candles, to masturbate, if that's what he was doing. All this took a good half hour, 45 minutes. It needed to be somebody who knew the schedule of the church.
It's a theory that aligns with Crawford's pattern of theft and vandalism against the university in the years after the murder. Still, though, only Crawford knew the truth. In July 2018, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to announce the resolution of the case and to answer lingering questions. And with that press conference, the shadow that hung over Memorial Church for decades had at last been lifted. Stanford University officials acknowledged this moment as well, with a spokesperson stating, quote, "It remains a heart-wrenching memory at the university. We know investigators have been working tirelessly to bring this case to a conclusion." Memorial Church had long since been restored to a place of peace and worship, but now perhaps the community could remember Arlis without the accompanying question mark of an unsolved crime. Today, Stanford's Department of Public Safety is a modern force. It's hard to imagine a single unarmed guard handling a major building lockup alone, or a serious crime scene without immediate and thorough forensics. The campus that once had 4 unresolved murders hanging over it has now seen 3 of those cases solved through DNA breakthroughs between 2018 and 2021. Bruce Perry, Arlis's widower, has walked a remarkable road since 1974. Devastated by the loss of his first love, he eventually left Stanford and refocused his life on understanding trauma and helping others heal. Bruce went on to become a renowned child psychiatrist and neuroscientist, respected for his work with traumatized children in events like the Columbine school shooting and the Waco siege. Now in his early 70s, Dr. Bruce D. Perry is a senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy in Houston and an author of multiple books on trauma and resilience. Though he rarely speaks of Arlis publicly, her tragic fate has been an undeniable part of his life story. Colleagues have noted that experiencing such personal trauma likely deepened Bruce's empathy in treating others' pain. In a sense, Arlis's legacy lives on through him. Bruce eventually remarried and raised a family, but he has kept Arlis's memory in a special private place. As of 2025, he continues his important work in mental health, a field in which he became a leading voice, perhaps shaped in part by the grief he endured so young. In the end, Arlis Perry's murder stands as a stark reminder that even the safest communities and holiest spaces are not immune to violence. But it is also a testament to perseverance of law enforcement officers who refused to forget a young woman's death, of scientists who refined the tools to catch a killer, and of a family that kept faith that one day they would have answers. And Memorial Church at Stanford still stands in the center of the campus. Its beautiful stained glass illuminated each day, a place of reflection where one can almost sense the echoes of its long history, both bright and dark. And with that, Arlis's soul, many feel, can finally rest under God's eye in the sanctuary of a justice finally served.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Kadak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.